Hey, howdy, hey there, I haterinos. I don't think I have infinite jesticles. Finite jest. Hello, finite jests out there. Welcome to the I Hate Infinite Jest podcast, episode number 29, pages 845 to 876. Our guest this week is comedian Max Bruno. Very interesting guy. And another one introduced to me by Katu King from episode 3. She's been a regular treasure trove of future guests. I actually first reached out to Max when I first was starting this podcast, and just slipped through the cracks, figured we have him back here. And yeah, you can find him on social media at Max H Bruno, all one word, Bruno being Bruno. Please go check out his film Smoots. That is Smoots on YouTube. You can actually click right down in the description. Go check it out. He feels very strongly about it. Me and Max getting into some neat stuff here. By the way, sorry guys that the day was late. The episode's a day late. I went over my server limits on Libsyn. Those 2-hour episodes come at a cost. They certainly do. So, yeah, this one's going to be a bit late. We're wrapping up the podcast this month. Don't worry, it's going to turn into something else. I'm flicking around names. There's been a name I've been assuming I would use this entire time, but I feel like I could come up with something a little more, something that'll look better on a t-shirt. So we'll see. We'll see if I get to that. But so very interesting things on this week's episode. We talk a lot about the concept of the third eye, which seems like it's been hinted at way more than either of us were realizing. Max read the book for the first time this year and was a big fan of it, and we get into detail there. Fuck it. Just go listen to it. Again, you can find me, as always, at Jesse Dram on Reddit, on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, on Parler, because I am a glutton for punishment. I started a Parler just, fuck with the right wing. Why not? And it took all of a day before somebody had tracked me back to my primary social media and told me my mother sucks dick where everyone could see it. Parlor, where the kids who pissed in the sandbox now have a playground of their own. Are they going to call you a cuck? You betcha. That's what we're there for. Short intro this week. I got nothing to say. At Mr. Jessico on YouTube. Send me money at Venmo. I am still unemployed. If you're a fan of this and your place is hiring remotely, hit me the fuck up. Yeah, let's be work buddies. Hey, Ashley in Madison, Wisconsin. Yeah, that's right. I know you. I'm making your name up. But if your place could use like any social media guy or copywriting, I mean, why not drop your good friend Jesse a line? I'll give you the ultimate in compliments, the ones that were thirsted after by the kings of old. Like the Roman Caesars knew their immortality meant nothing to held up to this, and that would be a shout out on a podcast. What? My cat has entered the room. She's not allowed in this room, but she's in here. I believe she's hunting a fly, though, so I'll allow it. Guys, I'm going to get going. Me and Perry are looking at houses with that podcast money. Just kidding. I'm still unemployed, and I don't charge for this. So she and I are going to go check out houses, and you are going to check out this episode with Max Bruno. Again, Max H. Bruno on social media. Go check out his stand-up clips. Guy's fucking hilarious. I'm sure I'll have him on the podcast again. Check out Smoots. He worked really hard on it. I'm going to go watch it right now. Go watch it with me. Because things are more fun when they're done together. Episode 29, 8:45 to 8:76. Y'all have a nice week. Hope you had a good turkey day. Later. Also, totally random, I found out my last name translates to money in Arabic. Like, I also saw dirham, but I guess dram is like a slang term for that. So, this is Jesse Patrick Arabic Money Dram saying Infinite Jest 29. Bye. Episode 29 of the I Hate Infinite Jest podcast, pages 845 to 876. My guest this week, he is a comedian. His name is Max Bruno. How are you doing, Max?
I'm doing the best I've ever been, man. Quarantine, just best mental health I've ever felt, best shape of my life, really crushing it every day, not spiraling alone in my apartment at all times. Actually, this is nice. It's nice to talk to somebody and do a podcast. This is cool, man.
Yeah, definitely. I have not been doing all that bad in quarantine. Then again, I had the benefit that like me and my now fiance, but girlfriend then, we moved in with each other for the first time, like literally the week, like that week we both started working from home, and that was when the quarantine started.
Dude, same. I've never lived with a partner, and now, she's not my fiance. She's my, girlfriend. We use partner. That's what we do. So
well, not everybody is as great a match as me and my fiance, but we all try.
But yeah, I'd never lived with a partner before, and we just kind of decided to do it for safety at the beginning of lockdown, and it has been going surprisingly well. So I'm glad to hear the same thing's true for you.
Nice. But I honestly think I think quarantine has probably destroyed a lot of relationships, but also made a lot of otherwise relationships just like particularly. I mean, I know you're in New York, I'm in Philly. Like just dating in the city overall can be really complicated just because there's so many options. Like if you want to be a lost boy or girl forever, like you will always have that opportunity, as opposed to if you're living in Podunk and like, nah, I think I'm gonna play the field of the two divorcees in town here in Podunk.
Yeah, well, that's one of the main reasons you leave. Like I'm from a small town in Ohio, and you have a much shallower pool to draw from for both friends and romantic partners. And if you really want to figure that sort of stuff out and learn yourself, you want to go to a more populous area where you have more options.
I mean, that's actually come up this week because I obviously Thanksgiving, I got to go home and visit my family. We're just in like South Jersey. It's honestly in the Philadelphia area. It's still somehow very podunk. But like my brothers are both very smart, but they're like blue collar guys. But like the one is like 23. I'm like, dude, if you want to start dating, like you either need to get to the city or like marry a girl now, because pretty soon all the girls in your peer group are going to be at the least like young mothers.
Right. Anyway, like all the good prospects get snatched up real early, because everyone it's like I said, it's actually much more sort of dog eat dog, I think, in that sort of situation, because, if you're in your small town and there's, 4 people that you might be actually interested in, I guarantee you there's 20 people that are just as interested in them. And I don't know. Yeah. It creates this weird, I don't know. I'm glad I got out of it. I have 2 younger brothers, one of whom got married at 20.
Wow.
And he is thankfully now very happily divorced.
Okay.
But like that's kind of the more standard back where I came from.
I mean, it's crazy. You hear about that, but like that is still more the norm, because it's like if you're gonna live in a small town, like what the fuck are you gonna? I feel like that's actually, you hear like a lot more of like love rival style violence in the suburbs and in there, because because in the city, like somebody steals your girl, unless it's like your best friend, like are you really like most of the times they're like, well, sucks that happened, whereas like in the suburbs, like that's my only potential mate.
Well, I mean, I'm a collection of memeified contemptuous like traits. I had like I'm polyamorous. I have a man bun. I love infinite jest. Ooh. Like, it's like I was designed by engineers for the internet to hate me. So like I needed to move somewhere where, I could exist a little more comfortably. And that's where it is now.
You're the opposite of a Puritan. You had to run away where you're.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. You know what? I'll probably have you back on then, because when we're done Infinite Jest, we're going to become more of a general like life criticism podcast, and I do have an episode on that I want to do on polyamory. So
great. Yeah. Well, maybe polyamory. I actually prefer non-monogamous, because polyamorous kind of implies some other things, but because you can really define it however you want. This is a conversation for a different time. I'm also very interested in the Church of Satan, if you want to talk about that sometime too. So, let's come on back.
As somebody who definitely dipped into the LaVeyan Satanism thing and also went through an Ayn Rand phase, like there's a lot to pick apart there.
Ooh, that Rand phase. I'm glad you made it out of that one. A lot of guys don't. We lose them.
A lot of people don't. And I'm actually finding online, there's actually a weird like Ayn Randy like right-wing contingent of Infinite Jest fans. Like they're a weird little pocket.
Well, I mean, you know, the novel is like I definitely I love this book. I started reading it middle of last year and finished it early this year, and have even sort of found it hard to read other things now. You know, like I got so like sort of drawn into what it is and trying to figure that out. And like, I don't know, I specifically, and this is where I'm probably going to sound like pretentious or whatever, but I do think of myself
this is the place to do that.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. I do think of myself as like a writer. I've sort of devoted my whole life to that. I wrote a lot when I was very young. I went to school for creative writing and like edited the literary magazine there. And then I became a school teacher and I taught writing. And now I am a copywriter. And then also that's just my professional life outside of my, you know, I write scripts, I write stand-up, I write, like, writing is I found one thing I was kind of good at, and I have built my entire life playing to that one strength, you know, because I have a lot of other things that are not strengths. So I was leaning into that. And so reading this, just from the quality of like the language and the storytelling and just the way it goes into your brain feels different than anything else I've ever read. Like it's such a like arresting experience to read this book that I mean, like I said, I've been thinking about it. It was so cool actually for this podcast to like go and revisit it and feel that again when I like reread the 30 pages. I just got sucked right back into it and had that sort of, I don't know, it's kind of ironic because of what the book is about, you know, this like arresting, this grabbing thing that you have to like look at. And in some ways the book feels like that to me sometimes.
Right. It's I definitely think we had an interesting little chunk here. Well, one of the issues I've had recently, just because I'm in like the Infinite Jest groups online, and a lot of them just don't fucking like me. They approach me with a how dare you to this entire podcast.
Yeah, well, the title is gonna piss them off from the start. So they have that clickbait headline problem where it's like, no, you got to read past the headline.
Yeah, exactly. But one of the things I keep seeing people put is like, they keep saying like, well, it's not a hard book to read. And I think those people are full of shit. Because
it's an incredibly hard book to read.
Yeah. But one of the things I'm realizing now, and I think that's why this podcast has been, it's not only for people who are, I found that people who are super fans of this book are still fans of like somebody critiquing it, but at the same like level of minutia as they love it. But on top of that, I do hope that people who have had trouble getting into this book like will listen to this, because at first you're just getting all this shit, all this perspective thrown at you at once. And at first you don't have any frame of reference to kind of cobble stuff together. But I think that is what allows sections like this, where like, this is the first time we have a first person perspective from Hal and Candenza. And we're like 800 pages into the book. And that's the first time we have this very specific viewpoint. So a lot of that early like chaos he's throwing out there allows this kind of like more envelopment. Like we get way more first person stuff as the book goes along. And I think that, you know, is really interesting. And one of the things that's had me come around on the book.
There's stuff that happens in the first couple pages of the book that you're like, what the fuck was that? Until you're at page like 900, you know, like you don't, it just comes back. And I don't know, I think something people really react to, like I've heard people say about this book is like, oh, he's just like, you know, throwing his big literary dick on the table and showing everyone what a great writer he is. And I'm like, okay, why is that inherently bad? Like if you're actually, I think that's just like a weird ego thing for people where they're like, don't make me feel dumb by showing me what a good writer you are. And I'm like, I don't know, man. I'm legitimately impressed by like, you know, the Sistine Chapel version of language. You know, one of my favorite painters is Hieronymus Bosch.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, you familiar?
I'm well aware of the triplets.
Yeah.
Yes.
But like, it feels very similar to that to me, where like he would do those huge mosaic insanity paintings of like heaven or hell or the Garden of Eden, and everywhere you look, there's like, that guy's got a bird head, that guy's shitting a pearl. You know, what's that coming out of what? That's like, it's like it's like 300 Salvador Dali paintings all like existing together within the like, Christian mythos, and it's incredible, and like that's kind of how this feels too, where I'm like, oh, it's this thing that I can just sort of look at, and I can't fully comprehend it. That I don't think you're supposed to. I think it is almost like it is not about resolution in a lot of ways, and I don't think it's about something specific either. It kind of, it's the closest, I know it's like sort of a cop out and it sounds stupid, but it's like the closest I found to a book that like actually is kind of about almost everything. It just kind of like brings all of this different, like you can think about it in all these different ways and follow all these different paths that go nowhere, but then also weave back in on itself. It has this very like sort of, I don't know if I'm using this right, but I think I am, like fractal feeling quality to it, where it's like as it zooms in, it's also zooming out. And as you learn more, you're also getting more confused. And like it is very contradictory and just like almost like psychedelic in certain ways. Like, sorry, I'm gushing. I'm a big fan of the book.
Now, there's a little, I think there's positives and negatives to the approach, because at the same time as I appreciate a lot of the small details in there, it is like the culmination and snowballing of that. Like the most frustrating to me about this book way into it is like Eschaton happens. Don Gately gets shot. And then we proceed to not follow up on those storylines for hundreds of pages because we need the life story of a janitor we'll never see again,
That, like, yes. But like it's sort of the it's like the Fox News problem, where like you watch CNN and they're like, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez just introduced new environmental legislation, and then on Fox News they're like, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez just introduced new environmental legislation. It's the same words, but the tone is like, you say that in that way, that like that frustrates you, and that delights me. Like the exact same thing, where I'm like, yes, I love that like these side characters and side stories just emerge as these like fully formed like short stories and like narratives that are like often incredibly like poignant, and then just go away, and you have no idea if they're going to come back, because many of them do and many of them don't.
Oh, that has been the really frustrating thing writing a summary every week, is I have to include every fucking detail, because I don't know if the color of Mario's Bolex camera is going to like save the day on page 900.
Right. Yeah. That would be it does defy sort of that kind of analysis, I think, in a kind of fascinating way. Like it's hard to, like, I can't imagine trying to write like a paper about this in college. Like what a nightmare that would be, or something, and I'm glad I never even tried. I'm glad I just read it as something to enjoy. And maybe that's coloring your experience of it a little too, because you've undertaken this like this very like summarizing analytical way of going about it. And I think that is going to highlight just how deliberately, aggressively inscrutable it fucking is. Because
I mean, sorry, go ahead.
No.
Doing it this way has definitely, I think it's made it infinitely more digestible. Like, because I'll give you a good example. I concurrently right now I'm reading The Devils of Loudun by Huxley. And I just hit a thing where like there were just 2 chapters where they broke away from the main narrative to discuss like the norms of the church in the 17th century rural France. And I just skipped the shit just because I don't like, okay, I get what they're going after. I don't need to know this. I know what they're getting at, but I can't do that in this book because that's the way I'm going about it. So it's made me have to force my way through the frustrations, and the fact that I've done it in bite-sized chunks over a period of 6 months has really made it more digestible.
Yeah. I mean, you're talking to a guy. I liked Moby Dick, which will diverge from the narrative for huge portions just to describe like boating and whaling minutia, you know, and stuff. But something about like those long divergent information dumps are, I don't know. I think I just like, what I like is stuff that is really dense and really.
Like what's some other stuff you were into before you came into Infinite Jest? Like what led you here?
What led me here? Well, I mean, you're legally required to read it once you get my man bun, the haircut. You know, you just have to do it. Like that's, I don't know. I think honestly, what drew me specifically to Infinite Jest was that, like, weirdly, that memification, that the same thing that happened with the man, you know, like man bun is just a punchline. Right. Like people just say it, like we have all just accepted that it's somehow wrong and not cool, even though they're like, that's just what I like. I just like having long hair and I wear it up. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like, I think I saw that happening with Infinite Jest too. It was just like, here's this novel by this author who killed himself. And it's supposed to be incredibly long. And he obviously put so much of himself into it. And why is it just a punchline? I wanted to know. I was like, maybe I went into it not expecting to love or hate it, just out of like a weird curiosity of like, what is this meme that I keep seeing happening? And I also, like I said, I was a teacher, and David Foster Wallace, my only other familiarity with him is he gave a commencement speech at a college. And I think it's widely sort of titled "This Is Water" because it's like, have you heard that one?
Oh yeah, no, we did a side episode on it, and actually I wasn't aware that the initial like story of like the old fish running into the two fish and saying this as well. I wasn't aware that actually originated in this book. I did that episode long before it pops up in here.
Yeah. And so I had used that speech in my classes just because I find it's like a great speech to talk about and analyze, particularly with like young people, because it's written towards young people and about like providing certain tools for thinking. So like, I was like, oh, I really like this commencement speech that he gave. And I've spent a lot of time discussing it with students, and he apparently, you know, did his magnum opus and then killed himself. You know, maybe I should check it out. And that was really what drew me into it.
Right. And there's definitely an enticement in like a book, because I feel like when we talk about what the book is about, you can take like, well, it's about tennis and spies, but like depression is always up at the top. So, I mean, you want to read a book about depression by somebody who killed himself.
There is like, okay. And again, I'm just sounding like, I'm sounding embarrassing, but this is the place to do it. Like, I don't think I've ever actually been brought to tears reading another book, but I have been brought to tears by this book. Like this, like the way, and I think part of it has to do with how zany and goofy and silly it is able to be. Mm-hmm. And then the emotional whiplash distance between that and like just how truly dark and like articulate and able, and it comes back to that language. Like I've never felt depression and addiction represented so starkly and truly and powerfully, and in juxtaposition with just, you know, the silliest shit on earth, you know, like so much of so much of what I felt reading this also was legitimate horror. Like I got freaked out by like, and I think it comes down to, there's even a section in what we read, you know, where it does that, like the wheelchair assassins are some of the silliest things I've ever seen. You know, it's like they are a joke. Their entire existence is, it's like, oh, there's the guys and you hear the squeak, and then the wheelchair guys are coming to get you. They're always in wacky disguises, doing these like harebrained schemes and stuff. And then like the way that they like torture and kill people is presented, like, you know, there was the homeless guy that they like locked up with another guy who was like cutting off his fingers and just shoving them under the door. And like, for some reason, that detail in that context, you know, like in a Stephen King story, you're expecting that, you're feeling that, but then like the silliness mixed with the horror, I think amplifies both in a way. And so I have like a lot of really heightened feelings when reading this, and none of that is more true than in the parts which I think are the strongest parts, which is like the Annette House people, the addiction, the depression. Like I obviously, like I didn't connect as much a lot with the more sort of like grander political stuff going on, which seemed just really wacky and
Yeah.
like, not as like, and not even really, like not especially prophetic. I think some of it is prophetic in that like there is this idea of, being just like captivated by entertainment and the desire to just be entertained. And like also even in the very stupid way with the phones where like the video call ones, then they like buy all these different masks to wear and like alter and I was like, oh, it's just filters. Like he wrote it in the most backwards stupid way possible, but like that's a Snapchat filter, so there are like things like that feel it, but that stuff isn't as strong as like when we really get to the core of like actual depression and alienation and addiction and some of the stuff we start to see with Hal in this too, where like that's one of the things that scares me so much is Hal thinking he's doing one thing and everyone around him is telling him like, why are you laughing? And he's like, I'm not laughing, like that, right. Like that to me is so unsettling, that like feeling of going insane and losing touch with reality.
See, I wrote that off very early in the book just because it seemed to me, because again, at first you have no idea what's ahead in the book, but like right away at that, knowing the kind of people who love the book, it is kind of easy to like roll your eyes and make a jerk off motion like, oh, he's brilliant on the inside, but no one understands him. He doesn't fit in. But as it comes in, like one of my greatest fears in the world is actually very similar to this. There's a disease symptom called locked in syndrome, which is more or less where like your brain is 100% like there and like not even your, like you just can't communicate at all. Like
just total catatonia.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. And kind of we're getting little glimpses, we should actually get into the summary itself just because we get into like some of that initial slide in here.
Yeah.
So I am an undisciplined podcaster and I fucked up. I didn't ask your social media stuff right out the gate. So
okay. Yeah.
Where can we find you? What are you working on?
I am at Max Bruno on all platforms. And the only thing that I really want to promote right now, since stand-up has effectively disappeared, is I made a short film that is on YouTube. It is called The Smoots, Smoots. You search The Smoots, and if it doesn't come up, The Smoots Max Bruno. It's kind of exploring themes of the disorienting unreality of how things can feel and using steadfast denial in the face of that. And there's puppets, so I hope you'll check it out.
Hell yeah. Puppets, denial, surrealism, and the downfall of reality. I am all about it. Okay, so let's get into this summary. At any point, just interrupt me. I'm sure you may also have some notes that I completely neglected to put down. So, all right, starting with 8:45, 8:51, November 19th, year of the pen, adult undergarment. After failing to find the veiled performer, Marat and Fortier have decided to attempt to acquire the family of the auteur. M. Brulim is now in charge of troubleshooting after one white-wigged volunteer began severing and slipping beneath the door the fingers of a second transvestite volunteer. So, as we know, these are the characters of Randy Lenz and Poor Tony, who, I don't think anybody saw Poor Tony having a happy ending, but I didn't quite picture this.
And like, this is what I'm talking, like that, I already called out that detail, and it's like, it's so... like we spent so much time with Tony and like he had such a he had such a horrible experience. And I think there's something to be, to criticize Foster Wallace about, like, this is not, he's definitely coming from his own perspective. And I don't think there's a lot of like particularly charitable views of like anyone gay or trans or anything like that in the book. But at the same time, the reality that someone with that could suffer this horribly is very true, and I think is represented. I actually felt a lot. I felt a lot for Tony because he's like, the depths of his suffering in this book are so intense. I think I remember there's like that point where he's in a bathroom stall, right, and like that was just holy shit level like darkness, and to see him just sort of thrown away like this and also
But there's also a real sadness in seeing how much they suffered and got clean and made it, and yet this is their immediate outcome.
And it's so horrible. Like, just like imagine having, like, you're so like, he's getting his fingers cut off, trapped in a room, like, fuck, that's that kind of shit that like makes my chest feel cold sometimes with this book.
Okay, jumping ahead. Marat has been placed in charge of planning how to kidnap the Incandenzas. I'm looking forward to this stuff. Like, as soon as Marat showed up at Enid, I was immediately like, ooh, okay, I really want to see where this goes. A little detail we talked before with the ridiculousness of the AFR. Marat knows going to Enfield itself is out of the question. Too many hills.
Yeah, it's that Looney Tunes ass bullshit that comes in right after that other thing, which is so silly, where it's like, yeah, obviously we can't do that. It's uphill.
I mean, I do think there is something that like does kind of work in horror, especially horror comedy, where you have the idea of like something that is so inept a predator of like actually getting to you, but once it grabs you is the most horrific fate. It's almost like a pitcher plant. Like it's one of those dumb plants that just hang down
or
and
like it
look
follows,
like a scrotum.
right?
Yes, it follows. That was exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah. Which also, actually, that movie kind of fell apart as soon as it got to them. It was the like approaching that was scary. That sort of like it's always coming for you.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that goes back to like classic zombies, because obviously the classical zombie, they're the reanimated dead. They have rigor mortis. They can't move all that fast. I think zombies got ruined when they were like running like fucking jaguars. But yeah, they were a slow moving horde. But God forbid if they got to you like and assimilated you.
Yeah.
Okay. They plan to wait until a bus with many students leaves and use the old mirror across the highway trick to make them crash, which is just such a fun, dumb, terroristic, like.
Again, like these guys, it's funny. It's Looney Tunes. Like these guys
it's cumbersome. It's like it's right above Wile E. Coyote painting the tunnel.
Yeah, it's literally stupid, and that is so clearly deliberate because of how it's juxtaposed with like other parts of this book, which are so grounded and so real and so not stupid, that it does feel like this kind of, it creates that dissonant feeling that I love and I find so strange about this book, that creates that like whiplash, especially with what comes very shortly after this, like to do this really goofy, silly shit and then go into, well, where we're going, which I should let you get to.
I mean, I would almost like to see like that kind of style applied to the old Looney Tunes. Like imagine when the coyote finally catches the Roadrunner and impales it with a fucking spike.
Yeah.
All right. Gately dreams he's in a southern motel with Joelle. He fantasizes she lifts her veil slightly to lick the sweat off of him. I wonder if that's something Wallace was just into, because it comes up a bit, like licking sweat. And I know he says that he wore the bandana not to look cool, but because he sweat a lot. I don't know.
I've been thinking about that too, especially with what happens to the darkness later in our reading, which was also forehead sweat based. And then there's what Lyle does, which is forehead sweat based. And I wouldn't say it's something he's like, I don't think it's something he's just into sexually, right. But it is
the method of his power.
It is a symbol of something. It means something that the forehead and the forehead sweat keeps coming up, and then the consumption of that. And I think that is maybe nodding to whatever kind of supernatural element is going on here. There is like this metaphysical stuff going on, and Hal kind of talks about it in that scene coming up later, where it's Stice is frozen to the window. Where they're talking about like, what do you think of like the supernatural, and there's that sort of thing where it's like, I don't know, man, there's Mario experiences the supernatural and he doesn't lie. And I've seen some fucked up stuff. And I mean, even early in the book, wasn't there stuff about like furniture moving inexplicably around? And
Right. That's been hanging in the background where just like they've been saying like just things will turn up places, but it's missing like a prankishness nature. Like, if you walked into a school cafeteria and there's like a chair super glued to the ceiling, it's like unsettling, like like a tennis ball shooter in the girls' bathroom. Like it's just it doesn't feel right.
Yeah. So there is this sort of like unraveling feeling, I think, and like people's grips on reality and what reality is. It makes me think of like, there's that people say like, ooh, we live in a simulation or whatever. And that's obviously like misinterpreted a lot because it's not like the Matrix. It's more like, there is matter and energy and stuff moving around in the universe. And we have a brain and senses and concepts and language, which is my primary form. And I think probably David Foster Wallace's too, of like sort of synthesizing a reality, but like color isn't real. It's just something our brain creates in response to light. It is simulated, like so this idea that like this simulation, the ability to perceive and then there's stuff we don't see too. There's like infrared radiation. There's all kinds of things that we don't perceive that are, gravity, we can see its effects, but we can't see it.
Well, there's also the whole notion of string theory that like mathematically for our world to like make sense, there needs to be like 15 dimensions, yet we can only really feel and experience like 4. But like there's no way around it. Like those other dimensions have to be there in one way or another. It's the only way anything makes sense.
Yeah, and I think Hal says something like hadronic particles behave in a ghostly way. So there's definitely this sort of like thing where it's more of a question mark than a answer, but it's like there is this acknowledgement and sort of playing with the idea that there's a lot of stuff going on, and that a reality is a little bit soft and malleable. And I think that the sweat and the foreheads and stuff is just kind of like, this is a thing that is happening and it means something. It definitely means something.
I wonder, this is just a jump. This is just an idea, but like maybe the idea of the sweat on the forehead, could it maybe translate to something with like the nature of the third eye, as we've heard in like a lot of psychedelic stuff? I mean,
I think there's probably something to that, and also just the idea that like it's like whatever your chemical makeup is, and that's closest to your brain, and whatever that is, it's sort of like, I think it's just like, this is a thing that matters, but we don't know why it matters, but it definitely does. And I think it really comes to a head in like what happens to Stice, when he freezes. I mean, we haven't gotten there yet. And so maybe we should wait till we get there. But yeah.
So back, Joelle is fantasizing about Gately. She disrobes before him, revealing a body he's only ever seen with a staple at the navel. I think that's actually a great descriptor. And his own erection rises and obscures her behind it. She then climbs atop him and unmasks herself to reveal Winston Churchill's face.
No, it's so funny. It's so weird.
Yeah, that actually got me thinking. I was trying to think if I had any ruined sex dreams like that. And the only thing I can remember, I remember one of my first sex dreams I ever had as like a 13-year-old, which I think may have been with Mila Kunis in my dream.
Oh, nice. Excellent choice.
Yeah, so I have good sex dream taste. But my 8-year-old brother woke me up. So I literally went from like looking into that face, telling my mom wants to know if you want waffles. And now I get erections over waffles. You've
never forgiven him for it, right?
What was that?
And you've never forgiven him for it.
No, never. Absolutely not. Yeah. Can you think of anything like that? Any ruined sexual memories or dreams?
I feel like my sex dreams are always ruined, but it's like the way that and this probably speaks to something in my subconscious. It doesn't turn into Winston Churchill, which I think is very funny. But like, it's always like, there's somebody who I'm gonna have sex with. They're into it. I'm into it. And then little inconvenient things keep happening to stop us. And I'm always just like, fuck. All right, hold on. It's like a shitty, like fucking, American Pie movie or something, where I'm like, it's always like I'm about to get it, and then some other thing, I'm like, oh god damn it, I gotta go deal with this. Yeah. Oh shit, I gotta go deal with that. Oh fuck, and then I just never get to the sex.
Not to mention the true horror is when you realize you're in a dream, and then like, oh no, this isn't going to happen, and then
I just did all this shit anyway. I just stressed myself out all evening and didn't even allow myself the dream sex that I so justly deserve.
Our subconsciouses are real cock blocks.
Sometimes.
Gately slips into another memory. We get a sad little side story here of a lady who lived next door when he was a child living with the MP. An older woman he was forbidden to fuck with that was thought to be some kind of witch named Mrs. Waite. Gately vaguely befriended her, went over a few times to talk with her. She ended up hanging herself. A few weeks before, Gately had seen her off property. The first time anyone had seen her off her home property. A pitying neighbor had a party for Gately and some neighborhood boys at their house. And Mrs. Waite had saved up and bought a cake for Gately and brought it over before returning home. The sober mom forbid any of the kids to eat because God knows what the old weirdo put in it. And when no one was looking, dumped it in the trash. Mrs. Waite couldn't have known, couldn't have seen it, yet the timeline seems to suggest she went home from there and hung herself. And Gately was slipping cigarette packs. I haven't smoked in so long. I forgot the term packs. Was slipping packs of cigarettes into her mailbox after for weeks, thank you, before she was found hung by a meter maid. So that's sad.
Yeah, man. I remember getting into this section and I was like, oh, it's this part, like, because this story actually like wrecked me. And I think maybe it just comes from, I think it's just really strongly written and incredibly well done. But I think maybe in my own experience, there was a house on the corner of the block where I grew up in Ohio that we called the Jungle House.
Mm-hmm.
And because it just had the lawn was way overgrown, like big trees and bushes and stuff, did not fit in with any of the rest of the block. And I never saw anyone go in or out of it in the fucking 14 years that I lived on that block. And but there were always little dogs barking out at us in the windows, and those dogs never came out either. So I think we can imagine, what possibly the inside of that house was like. And it always just it struck me as a kid as in the very much the same way that the kids in Gately's neighborhood did, where they're like, ooh, what is that? And we have these weird theories and it's so gross and who's in there, but then as you get older, you sort of grasp the reality of how sad and strange that is, and how the people inside, what sort of utterly trapped in whatever your mind has done to you, what life that creates for the people in there. And then taking that person, as David Foster Wallace does in this part, and giving her this very pathetic attempt to do something kind. And in the same way that the only thing, this was such a big thing for her, this person who is completely alone and completely isolated and just living this, she's so poor, she gives up the one thing she has for weeks, which is cigarettes, and puts herself through all that to make this gesture. She does a bad job. It's gross. It looks fucked up, and her very best is trash. And then she just hangs herself, and that is true though. That is a truth. There are people all around us all the time whose lives are that brutal and tragic and pointless and end in such isolating suffering like that. And
particularly with a lot of those hoarder people, it's not unusual. You kind of, we have that American notion of tough love, buck up, bucko, that kind of thing. And then as soon as like I had a friend of mine who was a roommate of mine who was like very, very self-isolated. And I started like, come on, buddy, like, you should
Yeah.
lose some weight. Let's get your life together, etc. And he ended up losing a lot of weight and he got a lot of stuff. But then like all his mental illness that was forcing him into that basement in the first place, like started fucking devouring him. So like
Yeah.
despite from an outside and from like my personal litmus on what makes life worth living, he was doing much better. Like those insecurities were like fiendishly going after him.
And I mean, David Foster Wallace hung himself. I
Yeah.
mean, like he was a guy who really struggled to be alive and to think and to deal with what it was to live life in this world as himself. He found that to be incredibly painful and alienating in a way that, like, I don't know, Mrs. Waite, like David Foster Wallace gave us this fucking lopsided, wacky, multi-candled cake called Infinite Jest, and then a bunch of people threw it in the trash and he hung himself. Like, I don't know, it's like, it's
Wow.
weirdly it's this very powerful little moment that I think is so like even more arresting in the context of his life and of his death.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I do think, just one little thing I wanted to put in there, just because I thought it was such a good distillation, is that I think you really do find out as you get older that like most of the things that are scary as a child are like really fucking sad when you get perspective. Like that's just, I guess that's just the only emotion you really know as if you're a
Yeah.
kid with like a not horrible life, if you don't understand something like, that's weird and scary.
Yeah.
Because that's just
But
the only thing you have to slot it into.
yeah. And then yeah. I like, I think that comes from perspective,
Mm.
and so much of like sadness. I think this book is incredibly sad. Like I said, this is like, I think the only book I've like actually teared up
Mm-hmm.
reading, like actually like actual tears running down my face reading a book. And I think it comes from just this fucking galaxy perspective that David Foster Wallace somehow fucking had. Like, I don't know. I can't, like the way he uses all the different language, all the different stories, all the different like weird facts and backstory, and like the space in your brain to do this. I think people talk about how like the more we have that sort of like broadening of perspective, and then the more you learn, often the kind of more you grasp just how dark and sad, like you said, like the child starts ignorant out of fear, and then that as they grow and learn more, that fear just becomes sadness and depression. And it is so huge in this book, the depression. It is enormous, and to the point where like it's devastating to read.
I mean, you actually just triggered a terrible memory for me. I remember when I was like when I was like 8 or 9, there was a kid on my baseball team that like we found out he had leukemia and like really, really bad.
Yeah.
And pretty much like a lot of kids were like mean to him just because like I if I were to guess, like my parents, they probably had a little like, well, Scotty's not doing good. And he pretty much, my parents warned me like this kid might die. And
Yeah.
I know, and I figured a lot of those kids were just like, this was such a scary concept to them. And particularly when you're little, like you're a prey animal. Like everything is based on safety. So
Yeah.
if something, even if it's not like, if the represented danger is just the fact that you yourself may die one day, you kind of just want to push it away.
Yep.
And then that kid did die. And now I drive past the park named after him all the time.
Yeah.
So now that we're nice and sad, let's keep going. So the entire basis of that story is so that we can now know that Gately's fever dream is taking place in Mrs. Waite's kitchen. Only Mrs. Waite is a nude and de-veiled Joelle. It seems pretty clear to me. It feels like this entire scene is being projected onto Gately by the Wraith James Incandenza, because it's entirely like what we have been told is the makeup of the Infinite Jest film. Yeah, Gately knows that without stating it, Gately knows this creature is death personified. From the description, she's reciting the lines from Infinite Jest. We all live many lives. Your mother is always the woman who kills you in the previous life, which a lot of feminists do not like about this book. As death explains more, exactly what we just said. As death explains more, Gately learns more, but becomes sadder and sadder. The sadder he gets, the more wobbly his vision becomes, and by the end, he's seeing Joelle through a light, milky filter, the same wobbly effect an infant sees its mother from their crib. Gately cries and asks Death to set him free and be his mother. Joelle only responds, wait.
Fuck, man. Like, I when I read that, but like, I remember the first, and then again, like, this part, I feel like maybe, maybe this would happen at any part in the book. I would find, and I would remember and be like, oh shit, this part, but like this part specifically has always stuck with me in such a huge way. So I'm really glad that this just happens to be the part that we're doing this podcast about. But like back to just the writing too, outside of like the themes in the story that we're talking about, like my writerly nipples got so hard when like he does that whole incredible story about Mrs. Waite, and then that's just to set up the room that he's in that, and you're like, fuck, like that was just to create this setting for this other scene. Like that whole thing served a really powerful purpose for this other scene. And then also the parallel of like Mrs. Waite, she says wait, and I know that sounds stupid and punchy, but it's that thing
I didn't even fucking pick that up. Good. All right. Good pickup.
Yeah,
good pickup.
Yeah. And then like the way that she's talking about how, she's like sort of enacting what's in the film Infinite Jest, and like, is it like, so all of these things feel like circles within circles. It's that like fractal thing I'm talking about, where it's like, we're getting more, but we're understanding less. And it's like broadening and shrinking at the same time. And like, it seems like it means everything and nothing simultaneously. And I literally can't make sense of it, but it seems perfectly arranged and deliberate and mosaic and beautiful. This section is obviously.
It's really good. I find myself responding to a lot of the stuff I can picture clearly. And honestly, with the amount of fans of this book, it really surprises me there are not more people who are like not making like little fan films trying to capture little scenes like this. Like, I know it's been said that Michael Schur from The Office and Parks and Recreation owns the film rights to Infinite Jest, not because he intends to make it. He just doesn't trust anybody else to make it because he's such a super fan.
Yeah.
But I almost feel like the only way you could make something like this a film is if you like gave it to 5 different directors and just told them to like, you make this chunk, you make this chunk, you make this chunk, and just have it be this beautiful disjointed mess. But like something like that, I would love to see acted out on film.
It is. And like, I mean, I love adaptations of books, and probably, I'm not sure if it's my favorite film, but it's pretty close, is No Country for Old Men, which is an adaptation of a novel, and I think is just incredible. So I'm not opposed to that. And I'm saying that because this sounds like a cliche thing that like some jerk off would say, but like, I really don't think you could make a faithful film of this in any way. I think it's literally impossible.
No, I think there's different approaches to this. Like I would want to see a film of this with the knowledge that there's no way it could encapsulate.
Yeah, you could do a tribute to it. You could do like things that are inspired and tribute to it, and like pull moments from it. And if you choose to like, I think there could be stuff that is inspired by and sort of, or just maybe even just like this moment or something. People could do like you said, a fan film or something. But the idea of trying to turn this into a movie or a series, I think is sort of antithetical to what it is.
Right.
I mean, even like the footnotes and shit. Like, what do you do? Like, how do you reproduce that? Like, there's all of these sort of like feelings in how it is. The switching perspectives, the way that prose is delivered, and like these different voices that shift, in like scale and in tone. You know, it can go from like the floweriest, most inaccessible language ever to just like lowbrow and like like that feeling and that way that it unfolds, I think is like is necessarily one of language and written word, because I think the language, I mean, language is such an important thing that is being explored by this. You know, I think like that's maybe the closest thing to like a core element of this is like what is possible with language, what is language, what do you do with it? Because, you know, like Hal fucking memorized the dictionary and uses all these crazy words and there's all these idioms and like things that are coming up. And I think that is so key to what this is, that if you translate it to a visual medium, then again, some of the visuals are so incredible in my head.
And that's what I want to see. Like,
I want to see them so bad.
Yeah, I do get it, that like there will be some important something lost in the translation.
I want to see the roving radioactive hamsters and the giant headed baby monsters and the fucking lung over the ETA, and I want to see the wheelchair guys, you know, on the top of a mountain talking to the.
Oh yeah, no, I want to see that. I want to see the impalement. I want to see the fight scene in the parking lot. That is one of the most cinematic things I've ever fucking read, is Gately and Lenz and the three Canucks in the parking lot.
Yeah, fuck, dude. Hell yeah.
Hell yeah. All right, let's keep going here. 851 to 854, November 20th, YDAU. Gaudeamus Igitur, which I looked it up, means so let us rejoice. This is the first time we are in the first-person perspective of Hal, and I'm just going to slam through some of this because I feel like whatever we stop to discuss will just be continuing. Hal awakes from a nightmare where he's in a zoo. He puts in a plug of Kodiak chewing tobacco and looks at Mario sleeping. He stands on one foot, the injured one, supposedly a great way to deep tissue work out an ankle injury. Finals are 3 weeks away. The first time in weeks there will be no AM drills, no classes all weekend either. Hal is woken by a dream of yesterday, too, of Kevin Bain crawling towards him. It is snowing outside. Hal actively hopes the snow leads to a cancellation of something. We find out this is the... they're supposed to have like an exhibition for the fundraisers of the school, the patrons of the school, against a team from Quebec. Hal notes that Pemulus has been scarce lately and that the Whataburger invitation is coming up in Tucson, which I think this is the first time we find out that's where the Whataburger is. For these exhibitions, they fly in some not very good international team to show off the Enfield kids against. Hal is hoping the snow will prevent their flight. It's occurred to Hal that without the Bob Hope, he really doesn't look forward to anything in the day. It may have become not just a high point, but the only real meaning of the day, which Hal finds appalling. So that's that little section right there. You know, I only relate to so much of the addiction stuff here. I have a teensy weensy drinking problem, so I get some of this. But yeah, I do know that horrible feeling where like you're just having a bad day and you do kind of like, well, at 10:30 I get to drink, so at least there's that. And isn't that a sad fucking feeling? Yes, I look forward to it just as much.
I think I remember I'm probably what a lot of people would call a high functioning alcoholic. I like to add the high functioning because, you know, I have a job, I have a relationship, I work out most days. I do art and things outside of my regular life. I live a very full life, but I do drink a lot every single day.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I always put it like, no, I drink every day, but the only thing it really costs me is like I'm not a violent drunk. As a matter of fact, it's the only time I'm anxiety free. The only thing it costs me is sometimes I have a hangover and I got a little bit of a belly despite the exercise.
So in this way, I really do empathize with Hal, and that, you know, his addiction is just to pot, and it doesn't seem to negatively affect, you know, his tennis or anything, you know, but he does need it, you know, when he's without it, I don't know, man. I think also when we're starting to see this, what's going on with Hal here, this is where we finally get like the very first scene of the novel, right? Which is the very first page.
Well, I think that's what it's going to lead up to. This is unfortunately the little annoyance here where like we see Hal right here, and now we're gonna go back to Gately, but then we're gonna go right back to Hal, like right where we left him. But yeah, this is the first time that we're gonna have people where people are like, why are you laughing? He's like, I'm not. What?
Right, but this is the return to, like, actually the book starts with the words I am. It starts in like Hal's first person in this scene at the beginning that is really confusing and upsetting when you first read, because you're like, everyone is just like, you can't make sense of it, and it's a very hard way to start a book, because you're like, what the fuck is going on? And I could see why it's almost like it's probably stopped a lot of people dead right at the beginning, because you're like, who is talking? What is happening? But like, that is, we start the book here and don't revisit this till now. Like, we start the book in Hal's head as he is like, I mean, they said he's like, the way they're he's making like horrible like animal sounds and stuff, right? He's just like, like a real like full like psychotic freak out. But from Hal's perspective, he's speaking very eloquently and doing this thing, and that is such. I'd say like my deepest fear probably is losing my mind, because you're stuck. You are your mind. So if you lose your mind, like you just start.
You're losing you.
I like to say when I was growing up, I was religious. My greatest fear was going to hell, right? But then
wait. Can I ask, Catholic?
No, just standard, like Methodist, like fucking milk toast.
Where I'm from, Catholic is the standard, so that's that's by default.
Yeah. But like, so I was so afraid of going to hell, but then I like stopped believing any of that, and I don't believe hell is real, so I can't go there. Except if I go crazy, my brain can make hell real for me, and I can go there. Yep. Like, that's the and the idea.
Everything is possible in our imagination.
Right. And then Hal has this incredibly powerful brain that is unraveling, and he can't communicate anymore. And he doesn't it's so, the idea is so scary to me of someone telling me oh, did you know that you always just make this noise or something like that? Like, you just do, and I have no idea. And I'm like, oh fuck, I don't know who I am or what I'm doing. Is so upsetting to me, and it's represented so starkly at the beginning of the book, but you don't really know that's what's happening then until now, because that scene was so long ago and didn't really make sense, when it was dropped. And I almost wonder why he decided to start the book there, or if that was the original beginning. I think a lot about what order he wrote this in, and did he shuffle it around? I don't know if he wrote it in the structure that it's presented. He might have just written all this shit.
He might have written them as individual pieces, decided what order they were going to be in, and then decide where to link what where.
Right. But the starting the book in Hal's first person perspective and not getting back to it until page 854.
51, yeah.
Yeah, is a fucking hell of a whiplash move, but it does feel I think that sort of choice makes it all the more just you're like, oh fuck, when I was like, oh fuck, okay, shit's.
Right. I'm also realizing that when you read it for the first time, part of you is almost like, does this person know what is happening to him? Although now with enough hindsight, it feels to me, particularly that CT is there, and it seems like CT is doing all the talking for him, that this is not just a horrible thing that is happening to him, but it feels like something Hal has been living inside of for a little bit now.
Yeah.
He's still struggling with it, but this isn't oh no, what's happening to me? He seems to be kind of oh, another day in this hell.
Yeah.
All right. So let's jump ahead. 854 to 864. Gately wakes to find the real non-death Joelle next to him, though creepily still looking down at him over the bars of his hospital bed as if it were a crib. She's dabbing his sweaty forehead and lips with a cloth. Joelle can tell Don's self-conscious around her. She finds it admirable that she has no idea how heroic and romantic he appears to her. unshaven and intubated, huge and helpless, wounded in service to somebody who did not deserve service. The last and only man Joelle let herself admire this way had abandoned her, then lied to himself why he had abandoned her, and concocted a fantasy betrayal between her and his father. Joelle is also clueless of the AA trope that newly sober people often find longer-term sober people romantic and heroic. That's a little detail I like here, that even after we've seen Gately do something big and heroic, like he has been established as the hero of this novel, is that Wallace will not let us look at them heroically, because we know Gately was, like, oh yeah, he valiantly fought these guys off, but at the same time, he fought these guys off who were trying to avenge, who were trying to kill a guy who killed their fucking dog.
Yeah.
And even here, like, she's having these emotions for Wallace. I mean, for Gately, but at the same time, it's like, also, she's newly sober, so I mean, like, that would be happening anyway without this huge circumstance.
Yeah. I love the 13th stepper thing, because I have several family members who have been through the program, AA, and I know that's a real thing, and I love the way that that he describes it and kind of dunks on those people there, because Foster Wallace was also in AA, so like all the AA stuff feels great in this.
And I mean, it's jumping ahead a little bit, but I do like at the end of the chapter, just because I feel like so much you hear about and for those who aren't aware, the 13th step in AA is dating somebody who's also in recovery, and it's looked down upon, but everybody does it to a certain degree. But the thing is, it's usually said as like, that 13th step, like nobody really cares. Where in this, we actually see Gately like feeling ashamed of his feelings for her, because he's like, I know what this fucking is, and it's poor Gately. And honestly, it's kind of perfect considering he's in this place where like he's seeing dream Joelle, and now he's seeing real Joelle, and he's in and out of consciousness. And even in this moment, he's like in and out of love, because like he could possibly be legitimately feeling these feelings. And, as we would typically read in a narrative story, you'd imagine like, yeah, it's the guy and the girl, and of course they fall in love. Where he's like, at the same time, like, I can't trust these fucking feelings, because this is also a trope of sobriety, and she's new, and if I am taking advantage of her if I even pursue this with the way things are now.
Well, so much of like what AA is, and the sort of like, again, back to like horror is kind of the feel, and sadness are things that I feel so much in this book. But like, I love that also, like, AA is in a lot of ways effective and is very explored in this, but like also the way that it just kind of like replaces it's kind of back to that power of language thing. They have these like weird like platitude mantras that then just like become real to you and like replace your personality, because your brain doesn't work. You're an addict. You're like, and they like, there is this sort of like hollowing out, and like Gately is like, I think he probably really genuinely, for good reason, because she's a fascinating, artistic, like attractive, kind person who is, like there's a lot of reasons to be into Joelle if you're Gately. I don't think he's being a predator in any way by feeling that. But there's also the AA thing where it's like, I literally can't do that. Like right. It is not something somebody with my kind of brain and my kind of situation can do. It's just another thing.
And not to mention, Gately has found so much through at first being averse to it, but then just everybody's been telling him like, shut up and follow the fucking rules. It works. And it has worked for him. So in another way, this is also his first deviation from following the thing that has been working for him.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not deviating. He wants to, but he's not.
True. Well,
like that's
it's a temptation.
Yeah, like of course it's really sad, because it's like, oh, and it seems like they have, she genuinely admires him, and there's something there, but they literally can't. They can't do it because they need these very strict, structured rules to not, just spiral into addiction and death, and it's the only thing keeping them alive for whatever reason they want to be alive.
Right. I think it's stated somewhere else in the book, but it's like you cannot confront the hole that is inside yourself if you're just stuffing something else in it.
Yeah, I think that's in the section exactly on the 13th step thing. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Joelle starts telling Gately about a recent Kentucky kid she'd seen at the Columkills meeting. Don realizes she's trying to give him a vicarious meeting experience through the story. This Kentucky boy, Wayne, who we'll probably never see again, but we're about to learn all about, claimed to have the longest blackout anyone could recall. He had a dent in his forehead from his pa hitting him with an axe when he was 9. One day, his old man started clutching his head and dropped dead. Wayne dragged his dead under the deck of the house and started charging neighborhood boys $5 to see a dead body. He took the money to some N-word moonshiners. Obviously, that's not my choice. N-word moonshiners, where his daddy used to get booze, intending to get drunk himself. And then he woke up just recently in Boston in a drainage pipe 10 years later. Which, was it, maybe they did good by going with a different script for The Hangover, but this one's interesting too.
Not all. The thing is, like, this is so funny and so upsetting. Like, that's that dissonance, that like thing that I think he does so well throughout this book that is so impactful to me, is like, it's funny that he blacks out for 10 years. Like, there's something just like inherently to me. It's like, yeah, and then he blacks out for 10 years. But then the reality of that is so starkly illustrated and gross and horrible, and grounded in like this like abuse and like that it creates a double feeling for me that this whole book does, where it is like a really sad joke, and I love that. So
it is an extremely sad joke in a book that is full of them. Joelle says to Gately that once the doctor says once Gately's out of the woods, they can take out the breathing tube, and Don can tell her to bring whatever he wants back to the hospital for him. This is actually Don's first realization. He just thought he couldn't talk or was fucked up. He had not realized he actually had a breathing tube in this entire time. Joelle notes she stopped seeing the AA sayings as patronizing cliches. Don notes she's still keeping it all at arm's length by speaking intellectually about it. So we're seeing her go through a lot of the same motions that Don went through. Everybody has a thing about the cliches in AA at some point in this book. We even get into a little bit of the tips that Pat told her not to count the days of sobriety. Just think of them as 24-hour chunks with nothing before or after them. The AA protocol of today, I'm mixing it up in my head. I want to say no day but today, but that's Rent, which is not at all what we're talking. One day at a time. That's it. Joelle realizes this is what kept her freebasing. She'd get frustrated and throw away the pipe and say never again, and then count the days. And then each day would get more improbable, like Evel Knievel jumping 3 buses, 4 buses, 5. And looking at it this way, it's just an impossible length ahead of you that you can never see landing beyond. Gately had the same painful periods of withdrawal where every second was pain, and the thought of 60 more of those seconds was torture. He had to handle each and every second individually to get by. And it's noted that though Don is in great physical pain now, it was nothing compared to the physical and psychic pain of withdrawal. But yeah, so Joelle is trying to look at her life now as one forever endless day. And Gately says if he had to live outside this moment and think of all the terrible implications to come the next day and day after, it would drive him mad. The real pain is trying to live outside of this moment. So
there's a lot of like interesting like time stuff going on in this book,
Yes.
And
as a matter of fact, I was really not upset, but like when they were first talking about the like megafauna cycling in the concavity, where it's like it goes from extreme toxification to extreme detoxification, I was actually hoping we were going to get like some sci-fi like time fluctuations in that area. I really thought it was going to go that way, and unless he pulls a fast one in the last 100 pages, I think I was wrong on that one.
Yeah, but I mean, time is definitely something that's played with. It's told all out of sync, and then there's things like what's going on with the Wraith, And I think even Lyle maybe has some weird time stuff going on, and
Well,
like
poor Tony when he's going through withdrawal. That's entirely explained as existing outside of time in this little like shit and addiction and pain bubble in like that
yeah.
darkened bathroom stall.
And so I think time is another thing in this book that is very that its plasticity is kind of explored, and that like even this passage specifically, like instead Joelle's talking about living her entire life in the moment of jumping. Like she's not like, I need to do this jump, or I have done this jump and I have to do it again. She's just hanging in midair on the motorcycle forever, and that's how she experiences time. And then Gately has this thing where like time got so reduced that every second like was like felt like this other thing. And I think there's something we can all empathize with about that, where your experience of time doesn't quite feel like consistent, at least for me. I know like sometimes time feels longer, sometimes time feels shorter.
And not to mention, I tend to get that when I'm really like sick. It has like that weird like everything, like the days go by quicker, but the moments go by slower. There's something to be said. There is a weird. I wonder if time isn't also the same way of like color, where we talk about the problem of other minds, where like
exactly
I cannot know what red looks like to you or blue looks like to you. I don't know how you go through time and experience it.
Yes, and those different experiences of time are in a sense as real as anything else, and that it is all constructed by our minds in reference to the inscrutable forever that is happening around us, but like the idea that even if someone outside of Gately wasn't experiencing time the way he was, that time he was experiencing was extremely real. And like that, I mean, that's that description of, it's another one of those things where like it's so good with the, I think because I definitely don't suffer from depression the way that David Foster Wallace does, or at the level of it, but just I've never felt something that speaks to suffering the way in some of the ways that this book does, like the way that it describes and makes me feel and understand that specific kind of suffering. Even just like,
it definitely makes me realize, like, I was diagnosed with depression as a teenager, and I read this book, I'm like, oh, I never had that depression. I had like, I had hormonal, nobody will touch my penis sadness.
Right.
This is a whole other monster.
This is a whole other thing. And I've danced with it a little more maybe than that. Like there are parts where I'm like, yeah, okay. And then there are other parts where I'm like, fuck, I gotta keep an eye, because I never want to get there, like because it can go, because it feels like oh, it could go there, because I've seen the hand of that monster but not its face yet, and David was looking right down its throat, is how it feels.
Right. Some people are lucky enough that their demons will only stand a decent length and like wave occasionally, and some people it'll just crawl into bed with you, unfortunately.
Yeah, and that's probably why he's dead.
Yeah, poor guy. I'm actually I went into this a little like blasé, and I'll even say a little cruel, just because when you don't know anything about somebody, like that's what, and particularly what I knew about the book. 'Cause my whole thing was I read like 400 pages 10 years ago, and I was at the point like, I don't like any of this. Why the fuck am I doing this? So there was a little like, the world doesn't understand him and blah, blah, blah. But then when you actually read the details, where like he'd been on medication for years, and then he went off it because it was like giving him big stomach problems, and then nothing else was working, and then he went back on that medication and it didn't work anymore. So like there was a big like ascending staircase of like desperation that eventually he just dropped off the edge of, and that's so fucking sad.
It's so frustrating to me, that whole thing where like, you just did and I know like you were referencing it previously, but like people do that like voices like, oh, I'm a genius and the world doesn't understand me. And it's like, well, yeah, but I think what you're reacting to are a bunch of fucking losers who think that that's cool and adopt that as their personality
Mhm.
without ever doing anything. But
And I mean,
I
just
mean,
being the age we are, I know a
David
lot of
Foster Wallace
people.
is a genius that was not understood. I think it is literally like, I don't know, man. As provable as it could be to me, that guy is a genius. Like, he was an
Right.
incredible mind. He used language and storytelling in ways that I think have never been replicated. Truly, and
True.
like, affected me, and he made me literally cry and laugh out loud, and the same thing, like that. And like, so I mean, yeah, it's like, what is wrong with saying I'm a genius and I feel alienated from everything? Like, I don't know. I don't think he's even saying I'm a genius. I don't think he is. Like, that's another thing that I don't think he's like saying. I think he's saying, I have a brain that does this and works this way and feels this way. And like, I think it's genius. I really do. And I think he knows that he is talented and intelligent and perceptive. But I think also a lot of the wackiness, a lot of the silliness that comes in is maybe going like, hey, also, I'm being silly. Like, I don't want you to think that I'm sitting here going like I'm king shit of Braintown.
Right.
Like, I
Right.
think
Right.
it is that thing where he's going like, okay, but also, like, yada, 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 silly shit because what the fuck am I doing? I'm sitting here writing this like convoluted fucking brick of a book, and I'm just working it out myself. Here's a joke. Isn't that funny? Like, I
See,
don't know.
I think some of the pushback he gets is particularly. May I ask, how old are you?
I'm 30.
Okay, so I'm 34. You and I are right around the same age thing.
Yeah.
I think there's a little bit of a pushback of I at least I feel it, of like suicidal ideation in pop culture, because like the exact age I'm at, obviously we all experienced the emo thing to a certain, the cut my wrist and black my eyes shit.
Hot Topic years.
Exactly. But also in childhood, I still have the very blatant memory of Kurt Cobain killing himself. And it does feel like you do want to push back a little bit at like that doomed genius. The world just couldn't take him. And there is just a little bit of an instinct. Like, Kurt Cobain was a fucking junkie who could barely play a guitar, and he took it too far. Like, I don't like, it's sad it happened there. I don't know. It's, you kind of want to pull somebody down just a little bit just to make that death seem so much less noble, I guess.
Yeah, I guess I've come from a more sympathetic perspective, because I don't think I don't know how many people are actually killing themselves to seem cool. Like, I don't think that like actually. I think there may be people who like talk about it and make it their fucking brand, and they're like, I just want to die. Like, sweeps bangs out of face or whatever. That person doesn't do it. The person who does it is, really in actual pain that is that I'm not going to say I can't imagine, because like I can imagine vividly and do vividly imagine circumstances in which I would want to kill myself, and I actively try to avoid those circumstances as whenever possible. Like, it's like I think I'm living my life deliberately trying to not kill myself. I'm going, okay, so I think that's actually, that's it's even a thing I've talked to my partner and other people about, where it's like, why did I, like, quit a teaching job and move to New York and live in a place with 5 roommates and no windows for years, working a shitty retail job, in the darkest place. It was to pursue something, like, because if I knew if I didn't try to do this, and I got to a point in my life where I knew I had just not done what I actually wanted to do and it was too late, I would kill myself. I like, that feeling would be like, so it's like trying to figure out what triggers those things and what makes you feel that way and what brings about that
those are very different pains. Trying and failing is a very different pain than never having the courage to try.
Exactly. Yeah. And like, so, and that's just me, that's my thing. But I think when it comes to, I certainly don't think David Foster Wallace or Kurt Cobain, for that matter, killed themselves as part of some like.
Well, no. Real quick, I want to make it clear. I wasn't.
It wasn't like a branding move, No.
I wasn't putting that on them specifically. I was putting that on the deification of suicide by their fan base. Then at no point did I think David Foster Wallace was tying that noose, going, "I'm going to get such a great write up in the New York Times."
Yeah, yeah. My book sales are going to go through the roof.
Yeah. Okay, let's go through a little more here. Joelle shows Don a photo album from home of her personal daddy and random farm animals, all of whom have a story. Hey, like Infinite Jest. Gately finally gets an idea.
My personal daddy.
Yeah.
It's so fun. It's such a weird way to say that.
It is. Gately finally gets an idea. He grabs Joelle's wrist and mimes to her to get something to write with. Gately randomly pictures Joelle and he happily married, with Gately holding a veiled child on his knee, which is adorable. Also fantasizes removing her veil and finding an eye in the center of her forehead. Oh, okay. Maybe I wasn't far off with that.
I know you mentioned that earlier. I think you're onto something.
Okay. Or Winston Churchill, for that matter. You know what? We can actually skip all that stuff about the 13th step because I think we addressed it pretty well. Yeah. So back inside the skull of Hal Incandenza, and this will wrap up our episode. Hal looks outside at the building snow. He pictures CT awake and pacing at the headmaster's house, building himself into a state of total worry at the exhibition tomorrow. He turns a corner and finds Ortho Stice with his forehead against the window, his breath fogging and obscuring any view to the outside. Notes that Ortho has a crew cut, which isn't important. It was just not how I pictured Ortho at all.
Yeah.
They talk for a moment. Ortho notes that Hal sounds like he's been crying, which Hal didn't notice at all. They discuss the opposing team from Quebec getting stuck in the snow and probably having to move venues to accommodate the snow tomorrow. There are sounds of at least two boys weeping down the hall. Stice tells a joke about a statistician duck hunter. Yeah, now that we're this far into the book, I can say one complaint I've never lost about this book is how vaguely unrealistic all these teenagers are, which I know is explained. They're like elite athletes, but like there's none of the hormones. There's like all these kids feel like these kids talk to each other as if they are like grad school dropouts, deeply in debt. And I don't know. It's something that's always rubbed me a little bit the wrong way.
Yeah, it's definitely weird. The way specifically that the ETA, but like the thing to me about that is people outside of ETA don't have that. Like if you read like a Stephen King book and you're like, why do these people talk this way? No one talks this way. Everyone's talking weird, but it's everyone. Like in this book, it's specifically the boys at ETA, where there seems to be a very elite, like weird fixation on like being, like being the smartest, and like the most athletic, the most elite. So it kind of, I think, is, to me, I think the charitable interpretation of that, which, and I think you make a fair point, because like they are super fucking weird, is that this environment sort of cultivated by the Incandenza family, which is the most extreme version of this, but it's built, the Incandenza family, like Hal is more like this than any of the other people, but he's obviously sort of revered. And then it's made by, Avril and her late husband. And like, they shaped this environment around their weird, like family way of communicating and weird obsession with like this sort of posturing that is like bled into the culture of ETA. So I think there's some justification for it there, but yeah, when they're like, it doesn't feel like these. I've never met anyone who acts or talks like this.
I actually think you may have just like very satisfactorily recontextualized this for me that I'm okay with. because if you look at this as like the extended parenting of Avril and James, I guess
Yeah.
it does kind of stand to reason that they would all end up like
Well, I mean,
pretty
and
fucked up.
even in the way that like the school is described in certain parts, because there's the lungs and then there's like like the tunnels and like the nerve center and stuff. It is described like this one sort of like being that is all sort of an extension of this family, you know. And I think there's something there where it is kind of this weird organism made up of all these people that do kind of get this hive mindy kind of thing, like, because like Eschaton is so insane, but like they're and so unnecessarily convoluted, but that's like sort of fetishized and enjoyed, and like that's what we do at ETA, man. This is how we play games. We do it in this fucked up, like super, like this is how we do it, and it is like a growth out of, you know, this family that has.
And it is pointed out early on that like they're pretty unique amongst literally all the athletic academies in that they have a really rigorous academic basis. So I guess they are kind of portrayed as the outliers from the very beginning.
Yeah, it doesn't make it any like it is a little weird when you're in it, but I do think there is. I'm not going to say that like it didn't. Once I kind of like was thinking, I was like, no, I think it at least makes sense as much as anything else makes sense in this. You know, like there is a sort of heightened, silly version of reality going on throughout the. You know, we've got, like I said, roving radioactive hamster brigades and stuff. You know, like shit's weird, and within the weirdness of this world, it bothered me less and less as I went along too. Because I think early on I'm like, what the fuck, and then I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I kind of see what's going on here.
So Hal asks Ortho why he's standing with his forehead against the window. This is where we find out that he was looking out the window, breathing onto the window, and that condensation froze his forehead to the window. Hal tells Ortho he's going to help pull him off. Ortho asks Hal if he believes in the paranormal, that he saw and heard someone walk behind him while frozen to the window and slowly walk away. Hal says he used to believe in vampires and himself used to say he'd see his father's ghost wandering around from time to time. Mario has seen paranormal figures as well. Stice says he has a paranormal secret to tell Hal, just as Hal yanks Stice's head back, which only stresses out Stice's forehead as he screams, put it back, which Hal does. Trosh wakes up, and I am loving the imagery of Trosh always. I just pictured him like Mean Gene Okerlund, always wandering up like, and I see we have a problem here. Mr. Stice, can we get a word in?
He's such a dick. He's just doing it like it's so annoying.
Hal tells him to get something warm. Trosh was mysteriously sleeping in Axford's room. Again, I don't know if that's ever played out, but there it is. We meet two janitors, Kenkel and Brent, and because it's Infinite Jest, we're going to get their entire life story. Hal tells the janitors they need to get something warm to get Stice unstuck. The janitors note that Hal is telling them this like he's about to burst into laughter, which Hal does not realize. So yeah, now we're getting a second. Whatever's happening to Hal is happening very quick, and I'm realizing this is also. It's when I first was leading up to this, I immediately thought like, okay, Pemulus is going to give the DMZ to Hal at some point, and that's what's going to lead to this downfall. Whereas it actually seems a little bit more like Pemulus was right, that like the marijuana was like the duct tape barely keeping him together, and what if he falls apart without it?
Yeah.
So I don't know what else to make of that.
Those janitors are so gross. Like I hated that. The phlegm where he spits jets of phlegm and then his fucking simple-minded crony like goes over and wipes it up while he just monologues at him. Like that was that was gross. And I love that it's sort of like thrown away, but to me implied that the Brandt, the guy he's got the weird scars on either side of his head and is described as like moronic or submoronic. They're like, and they both live in this apartment that overlooks a parking lot where a bunch of unexplained ritual mutilations recently took place. And I'm like, oh, that was totally that guy. Like, I don't know. I drew that conclusion. I was like, oh yeah, they just overlooked that. And like, a bunch of that. And, he's got these weird unexplained scars on the side of his head and is kind of a creepy submoronic guy. I'm like, oh yeah, that's for sure him. Like,
I mean, that is kind of a fun David Lynchian kind of look at the suburbs. Like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
that's a janitor. He's a decent guy. I mean, he does some ritual scarification shit, but everybody's got their thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think, I mean, I think we should really, I don't know. Because I don't know, but we touched on it before, the third eye, the sweat, the forehead, and then, with Stice, his forehead is what is fused to this window.
And what was he attempting to do? He was attempting to see, and he fucked up his third eye over it.
Right. And he even said, like, they even say that this thing happening is itself supernatural because glass doesn't conduct heat like metal. You can't, he shouldn't be stuck like he is, but he is. So like something supernatural happened. He was looking, like, he woke up, he was looking out the window and he got like fused to it. And there was this visitor that came through. Like, it is this kind of, again, that like, there's this lurking unreality. There is this unraveling thing that is happening in the background. And I just feel like, I don't know if this just like nods to it and points to it. But again, I don't fucking know. Like, what does this mean is something that I don't know. Like, he was woken up by what? His roommate shitting the bed, right?
I think I said his roommate snoring, but it's possible I might have
No,
missed
there's
that
something
detail.
about his explain, and then he has to put like the sheets ripening under the bed. He just gets new sheets and goes back to bed, and then But so he's woken up by his roommate. I think it's not really clear. It's either like, I think he's shitting the bed. He could be having nocturnal emissions though, based on how it's. Anyway, he's ruining his sheets over there,
Right?
And in a way that wakes up Stice, and then he goes immediately back to bed and starts snoring, and Stice can't get back to sleep. So he decides to look out the window, and then he just sort of blanks out, right? Like something happens.
I think he did just blank out for a little bit, and when he came to, he'd been there long enough that he had conducted himself there.
Yeah, and then there's he's the one who brings up, like, do you believe in the paranormal or whatever?
If I remember correctly, I think Stice might also be the guy where, like, it seems like the object impermanence stuff moving around the academy has happened to a few people, but like Stice has been the one communicating a lot of that to us, I think.
Like, maybe oriented around him in sort of a way.
I know there was one scene in the cafeteria where, like, they're doing the incandenza thing. Okay, again, this is applying to me more and more because they're doing the incandenza thing where they're all having different conversations.
Yeah.
And I think Stice is the one that keeps talking about, like, yeah, there's a thing hanging on the wall. I have no idea how it got there. Has this been happening to anybody else? And I think he might be the first one showing actual concern about it amongst the kids.
Yeah. Well, and like he says that he brings up the supernatural. He asks Hal about it, and then he's like, I could tell you some stuff that would shake your fucking tree, man, or something like that.
Yeah, that's right. He says he has a secret to tell him, and then I think we don't actually.
And then they just breeze past it. So I think whatever happened to him, he's not telling us the whole story. Is why I think, like he's saying, I got up, I was looking out the window. Next thing I know, I'm frozen to it. Something happened that he's not ready to talk about.
Right.
In that is what I think. And that he got fused to this thing. Now, what it means that, like, he has this, like, whole casual conversation with Hal before he even tells him what the predicament is. And that, like, he sat there with it, like, against the window, like, until he couldn't feel it. He's like, oh, I was, like, starting to get worried, but then I just stopped feeling it. I wonder if it is, like, kind of a metaphor for something, and that, like, like Lyle licks the sweat off the forehead, like that's how he, like, learns about the people, the third eye or something. And then just maybe this attempt to just, like, he saw something that, like, I need to stop. I need to not have I need to just be two eyes, like, let's just burn off.
Yeah. To look at that as maybe
freeze off or kill or block or saw something. Maybe it wasn't even a conscious choice. Like, he just was privy to something so whatever that part of him is now annihilated. And I'm that's my best interpretation, right now, but I'm sure there are lots of people with different theories, but that's kind of like the feeling I get from it. Just pulling all these different threads together and trying to make them make sense.
Yeah, like I said, more so than even finishing the book itself. Like I'm just ready to be done with the book at this point. But I am looking forward to diving into the analyses because I'm somebody who does that on their own. Like, I watched that 4-hour video that claimed to explain everything about Twin Peaks, which yeah. So I'm looking forward to dive into it. Maybe people will hate me a little bit less when I come ask them these questions.
Well, I mean, I just met you and I don't hate you at all. You seem like a great guy.
There you go. Well, you know what? That is the end of the episode. So maybe let's not push my luck any further. Yeah. Thank you very much, dude. Yeah. Once COVID's done, I'm going to be trying to come up to New York and do comedy more. So maybe I'll run into you somewhere.
I'd love to see it. Can I plug my thing one more time?
That was my next question, sir. As you were.
Fuck yeah. Right. Guys, please watch the Smoots. It took me a really long time to make, and it only takes you 13 minutes to watch. And I promise it will not be so entertaining that it kills you.
I mean, you could have just lied and said it will be entertaining enough to kill them. I think that would be a little bit, but yeah, I'll put that link in the description. I'm going to go check it out myself.
Awesome, man.
All right, Max Bruno, and I'll end like I end every episode. I will stop recording now, but you and I keep talking. See you guys.
Right.
Sorry, this was a day late. I have to tell them now it's a day late because I went over my data on Libsyn. So I'm sure they'll already know by the time I get to this. I should stop recording.